All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on the March 23rd, 2021 instance of the Kubernetes SIG Windows community meeting. As always, these meetings are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so be sure to adhere to all of the CNCF code of conduct and standards. All right, let's kind of jump in. Let's see, first of all, I guess we can check and see if there's anybody kind of new on the call who wants to reach out and say hi and give them the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, I'm Sebastian. I've been on this call a few times before, but I'll be trying to attend more frequently now. I'm from Red Hat, so I work with Arvind and Ravi. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Great, welcome to the meeting and thank you for introducing yourself.
Cool, that's great. Hi, Sebastian.
Hey, yeah.
Is there anybody else? If not, we can go into the announcements. All right, there's a couple of announcements here. The first one's being 121 deadlines. Tomorrow is the test freeze for the 121 release. So if there's any PRs that are test related that need an extra set of eyes or are related to Windows and need the 121 milestone, please reach out to any of the leads on Slack and we can help get those merged in. So we have a clean test signal going into the release. The next deadline is on March 31st is the doc deadline. If there's any doc updates that are specific to the 121 release. Those are good to have staged as soon as possible because the doc reviewers like to review those too. So if anybody's planning on making any kind of additional doc updates, please open those as soon as you can, just to make sure there's adequate time to get those merged. I've also dropped a link to the kind of release schedule for any other deadlines, including when all the different RC builds are going to drop if there's any additional testing that's needed. I guess one other announcement is that we're in the middle of planning and recording the KubeCon EU talk. So if there's any kind of interesting announcements or anything you'd like some of the leads or SIG Windows leadership to announce or touch on for the KubeCon talk, please let us know and we can try and get that added to the slides. All right, next thing is Jay and James and myself were talking and we were wanting to do an interest check to see if there would be any interest in setting up a community meeting, a recurring community meeting that's in a more Asia-friendly time zone. I think we both know some community members who aren't able to attend the meeting due to just the times, so we'd like to make it more accessible to people. I think we will probably reach out on Slack to get that interest check going and see when there is when's a good time for everybody to meet. So if you know anybody who kind of falls into that bucket, ask them to join the SIG Windows Slack channel, hopefully later this afternoon and drop a comment there. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Jay?
I'd also be interested in just suggestions about topics for that meeting as well. I have, some friends in Asia that are working hard on the LDAP GMSA stuff. And so maybe if there are any topics that some folks know, some people in the Asia area are working on that are interesting, I'd be interested in seeing that. Maybe that we could have a little bit of theme for it. So we don't just have two completely generic meetings, but yeah.
Yeah, and I've noticed just over kind of the course of the past several months or years, there's been a couple of folks that are in the Asia time zones that just kind of submit PRs or issues and aren't as active in kind of Slack or the community meetings or other places. So if anybody has any suggestions or for reaching out to them and helping them get more involved kind of in the community, yeah, please reach out and we'd appreciate that. All right, next, Perry and Jay, do you want to drive this? The next topic?
Yeah, I don't know if Perry is here, but I can drive it. We've gone back and forth on this 15 character node name thing in the upstream community and in the upstream like Cappy sort of side of the community. And I just was wondering, like, where do people kind of stand on all this? Because it's going to affect Active Directory, and it's kind of probably going to affect Cluster API provider vSphere. And I think right now in Azure, what they do is they trim the characters down. They trim down some portion of the character and then add the auto-generated stuff at the end. But it seems like we just haven't like collectively come up with the actual like what's the right thing to do here solution. So I think James might probably know. Let's see, there's another link here that I can open up and take a look at.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this net BIOS on host names is the
Mhm.
core issue 2217. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've gone back and forth several times on this, and I think the latest was that it's needed for some systems to tie it back to that 15 characters. Is there any chance of this net BIOS restriction going away? Yeah, so it's all in this issue as far as to where that goes. I don't have enough experience with like net BIOS and like how GMSA works with that to be able to make a conclusion. I think the final thing at the bottom was that if you have systems that do require net BIOS, then you're going to have to keep it to 15 characters. But there's no limitation within Cluster API as far as like the names being different in different sizes. And so that on the Azure side, we're not even able to create VM names that are longer than 15 characters, and that's why we are trimming it there. And I think that's due to Azure being supportive of the NetBIOS component.
But if I could also read that question as, is there any chance of the net BIOS restriction going away for the Windows OS itself? I don't see that happening anytime soon,
Okay.
if ever.
So we also had this issue for Google side. So the recommendation is just have to use short name for node or host.
Yeah, I think that's probably all that we can do at this point for Windows nodes.
Yeah, I think at the bottom of the issue there, Jocelyn did a pretty good job of summarizing all of the different things that have been discussed. And if you plan on supporting NetBIOS, which is required for some older AD solutions, then you are going to have to limit it to 15 characters. Now the question comes, I think it's been brought up once or twice here, is do we do something inside Cluster API to generate those names so that they're unique and similar across all of the different providers?
It looks like Aravind commented that in OpenShift, they do restrict Windows node names to 15 characters for certain platforms like Azure and vSphere. So
it mentioned it will deprecate it in certain version of Windows.
So yeah, we can maybe get Jocelyn to clarify that a little bit too, but I think that one of the kind of use cases is to bring some infrastructure into a cloud native ecosystem like Kubernetes for kind of large Windows deployments and leave some pieces of infrastructure that aren't able to kind of as easily migrate on-prem. Use Active Directory or group managed service to tie those together. there is the possibility that like even some of that infrastructure, that older infrastructure, is running on older versions of Windows Server that still has these requirements set in place. But that is a good point to call out.
I think Nadir has his hand up.
So like in the future, those Windows version will also end up support, right?
Theoretically, this says that the NetBIOS requirements were removed in 2000, but I think that that's just the requirements. I think that there's still ways to configure everything to use NetBIOS. So I think a lot of this really depends on what exactly each individual kind of cluster workload is, how it's configured. Nadir, did you have a comment on this portion of it?
Yeah, I just arrived late. Jay pointed me out. We were chatting about this. I think also, regardless of like legacy stuff, the SAM account name in Active Directory is restricted to 20 characters. That isn't deprecated anyway. That is just a function of Active Directory, and that LDAP field. So we do need that. Cluster API itself is not actually responsible for any of the host names. It is down to the providers. So if you take AWS, for instance, the node name is a function of the instance ID. And in fact, the AWS cloud provider requires the host name to match the instance ID in order to verify its identity. So today we have no way of allowing a EC2 instance with a node name that isn't instance ID to be a member of a Kubernetes cluster. There is going to be a flag to allow that. It'd be like a opt-in for the AWS cloud provider with a big warning on it, like there are some security implications if you do it. But we need to actually go through the cloud providers to check those bits, the bit around node registration, and then it will be down to the individual providers to figure out how they provide names. So this appears in vSphere because vSphere, the identity is anything. So we basically just take the machine name. But for the other cloud providers, that's not the case. So we actually need to investigate both the cluster API providers and also the standard Kubernetes cloud provider integration to make sure it all works. So I think that's the actions that need to follow from this, is to check both.
Interesting, thank you. Yeah, and as I think reinforced here, it says that like sticking to the 15-character node names is a safe option, but not a strict requirement. So I think the discussions here are mainly, should we move that to be enforced or not? I'll add that comment.
And Udemir, you have your hand raised.
Yep.
I wanted to ask, the extra 17 characters that are randomized appended to the host name, to the node name, sorry, are those the responsibility of the kubelet or the cloud provider?
James, do you know that?
Could you ask that again? I'm not sure I understood it.
Basically, a node name, so the object itself has 17 characters that are unique. That randomized. So we get the workload cluster 2 MD something something. We have a couple of randomized strings after that, separated with a dash. What component adds the 17 characters? Do you know?
So
I don't.
Yeah, in cluster API, the machine gets I believe the characters are auto-generated by cluster API. And then typically, like in a Linux workload, we just take that name and that becomes the name of the machine, that the infrastructure machine that's created. In Windows, in Azure, you can see that's linked in that there is we just kind of chop off the everything except for the last 5 characters, and then just append that so that we get some randomness to it. But we're just pulling that random bit is coming from cluster API's name generation.
I see. So there has to be some sort of a knob in cluster API to allow you to specify the length of these extra characters at the end. You basically have to control what is the length of the string at the end, right?
Yeah, and I don't know that those are that's exposed currently, but that could be part of, like, if we wanted to make this generic across all providers, we could maybe modify that in cluster API, and then all the providers could just take that name and just apply it to the machines, and that way we would have, from a Windows perspective, have that short to 15. I'm not sure if that's something, Nadir, if you could say like that's something we could do. I think it's been discussed in that issue that we linked there as a possibility.
Maybe. I think the tricky bit will be for some of the cloud providers. I think especially AWS is how do you get the host name to be that? Because for AWS, it's only represented as a tag, the machine name. There's no other way to pass the host name down other than to set it in Cloud Init, etc. So we'd need another mechanism in plus the API Bootstrap provider to take the actual machine name and make that the host name. Yeah, so it's done at different layers depending on which infrastructure platform you're on. So I'm not sure how generic we can make it at the moment.
I mean, does anybody really, really want huge host names? Do we have a really like burning, like passionate use case for that? Or is it just like because
Yeah, I could see the cluster API kind of core yelling if it's longer than 15 names, but then still kind of relying on each individual CAPZ or like cluster API provider to make sure that those names get set when the nodes actually come up.
that sounds like an easy problem to solve, right? I mean, we've only got like 6 providers or 7 providers, right? I mean, just how many clouds are there, right? Like, I don't feel like it's a huge problem, is it? I don't know.
It's a problem because there's no way of setting the host name for AWS. Like from the cluster API level, it has to go into the Bootstrap user data. So we don't have a mechanism in cluster API today to feed the host name in. So that's a change to how we generate that Cloud Init data. That of course causes problems for people who don't use Cloud Init. So Red Hat and Kinroke who are using Ignition, it's a different mechanism. So it's done at a different layer. Whereas for vSphere, the VM name is sufficient. So it's not a simple problem because it needs to be solved at a different layer depending on the infrastructure provider.
Are those details called out in this issue here? That might
No,
be,
they're not, but I will add them.
okay, that might be a good place to add, or it might be good to add those here and say that this would kind of change how cluster API sets the names, or that would be required for some of the cluster API providers.
Yeah, and that also that detail about how even at the provider level, it's going to get hairy. Okay. Well, thanks, Nadir, for totally jumping on this like totally randomly and coming. I really appreciate it, man.
Are there any kind of next steps here for this? It seems like we're kind of circling around some possible things we can do to make it better, but I'm not really clear what the next steps are.
I think the next steps are research the mechanisms by which you can set host names for each infrastructure provider that we care about, and also verify how node identity relates to host name for each cloud provider, not the cluster API bit, but the Kubernetes cloud provider, to make sure it's even allowed.
So here, somebody's looking for a getting started project. This is an interesting little research project to start getting involved in the community a little bit.
I think the big question that I have here is like, what services the cluster is going to use that depend on NetBIOS?
A lot of these, probably a couple ones. I know for a while, a lot of SMB protocols relied on the NetBIOS name. So if there's some kind of SMB shares, or I could say storage servers set up on with resources that are managed outside of Kubernetes, and then folks are using like Active Directory or GMSA to access those resources from a Kubernetes cluster, that could definitely be impacted. Might be good to call out some more use cases in here too, if it's not already.
Yeah, because from my understanding, if none of the services in a cluster depend on NetBIOS, they will just get a warning about the 15 characters limit, and that's all.
Yeah, my understanding is there's nothing in a pure Kubernetes cluster with Windows deployments that would be restricted from this, but there may be outside resources outside the cluster that folks are trying to access.
Yeah,
Right,
sorry, it becomes a question like how many users will need NetBIOS services, the services that depend on NetBIOS.
Yeah. I don't see money much in this issue, but I kind of have a feeling that users are hitting it, which is why the issue came up. So it might be good to capture those too. All right, let's come back to this in one of the upcoming meetings. I think that those next steps proposed are great. We can try and find an owner for those in Slack, or just by commenting here and on the issue. All right, next topic. We still have a couple minutes. Last week we kind of walked through some of the various sub-projects that were under the SIG Windows purview. And we are looking for help and contributions for all of these. So we've gone ahead and added or called out kind of some of the areas that we are specifically looking for help with here. If there's anybody who is interested in any of this, either just, I guess, a lot of these can just start contributing in open PRs. If not, always feel free to reach out to us kind of anywhere. Jay, do you have anything you wanted to kind of add to this? I know you've been a big help in getting this effort started.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of an interesting thing that we're trying to do, because at the same time that we're trying to grow the contributors to these like initiatives, we're also open to growing the community in another direction. This just kind of felt like a good way to get people to be like, okay, I can own something concrete, because there's so many things flying around in SIG Windows and in Kubernetes in general, that for somebody coming in new, it might be a little overwhelming. So I guess just the 2 points to make here is experience is not important here. We can help you with like the different technical details of things, and we know we can help. We can get help for anything. So it's just a matter of if you're interested in something, and if you're not interested in any of these, like if there's another area that we're missing, let us know, because the goal is really to create some new owners and some new technical expertise in the group, as opposed to solving one of these specific problems. But this is a good starting place. So that's.
Yep. So, oh, go ahead, Laurie.
Oh, thank you. What would be your goal for the next 3 months? on this? Like, if you could paint the perfect picture where you'd like to be with the different subgroups forming, where would you like to be?
I mean, for me, the goal isn't groups. The goal is people with hands-on keyboards getting involved in owning things. That's my goal.
Yeah, but what, sorry.
Yeah, I have no preference in terms of what group that would result in, but I assume some group would come from that, right? I know it's kind of a backwards answer, but that, you know what I mean? It's just, we have nobody doing any, we have, time is so limited for people to just get in there that seems to me like the real goal.
Yeah, I think more contributions from more unique individuals is probably the most generic statement I can make on that. We're just looking for people who are interested in getting kind of involved in getting, just who want to start contributing, who are maybe a little bit hesitant to do so because it is kind of just the nature of our SIG, how there's a lot of cross SIG involvement, and that can be off-putting. So we're trying to carve out spaces where there could be more like focused contributions.
Right, I understand that. So I think that when you have an actual result, because I'm hearing a lot of SIGs wanting to increase their contributors, they need to, right? So if you were able to say, like, in 3 months' time, we had X number of people that were new, contribute something, or 10 new contributions from different people that hadn't done so before, any sort of reasonable metric that you could shoot toward that might also
I have
keep
one.
folks on track. And then also how you would actually track this, given it may need to be a manual task because DevStats won't. Well, you could use the unique IDs if they're brand new contributors, but I think you want brand new contributors to SIG Windows. So
I have a metric that I would love to see, which is, 10 commits from one person in the net, from one person who's never committed to SIG Windows before. I would throw a big party for everybody if we had that. We'd have a SIG Windows party, and you'd be invited, Lori, and so would everybody else on this call. I think that would be really cool.
So that's a good goal. Any others that we could think of, like maybe X number of contributors in the 3 months period? Does that one mean much to you?
That would also be nice. I'd want to review our current numbers and everything before kind of committing to any specific number or calling something out. But
even if it's like 1 or 2, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's another metric that has meaning. Is it the exact metric that is meaningful to me? Not so much, because and updating a README file or updating a comment is usually the first commit you make to a project. So the commits don't really get good until you get that flywheel thing going, right? But if we got 3 new contributors in the next 3 months, I don't think anybody would be, sad about that. It'd be weird to say we want 5 new contributors, because we all just know the nature of this, that it's very hard to even get 1 new really active contributor. So but yeah, 2 or 3, I feel like, right? If we wanted to put that on the books as a goal, I don't think that would be bad. But yeah, I agree. I guess Mark made a good point. We should probably look at our current situation.
But yeah, I think, just aiming for 3 to 5 people who have never contributed to SIG Windows, like SIG Windows issues or PRs before, would be great. I think we're running out of time. We'll follow up on this with Lori and everybody. Lubomir, I see you had one more agenda item. I guess we can briefly discuss it now, and then if there's a lot of interest, maybe move it to the first agenda item for next week's meeting.
Yeah, I saw some PRs in parallel. One of them was by Claudio to test HCD for Windows. I saw another kubeadm PR where we had a discussion about Windows control plane. In parallel, these couple of PRs also, we had a bit of a discussion at VMware whether we have customers running the Windows control plane. Yesterday, I spoke with Cecile and Craig from Microsoft on private. Like, I wanted to get the whole, to understand the whole picture. Like, what does the SIG think about eventually supporting? I know that this is not a short-term goal, definitely.
Yeah, I thought about this before too. I can share my comment and then we can open it up. I think that this is like, I think that we're seeing customers and end users who would like to see this. There's a lot of people who are kind of all Windows based and are finding that managing the Linux components in their unmanaged clusters it's just a different skill set than they have. And they would like to be able to manage a fully Windows cluster. So that is kind of on the radar. But I think making that happen is going to be a very long process. Because even if we get all of the standard components that are running on the control plane, Kube API server, etcd, all of those running on Windows, I think that there's still going to be kind of just an endless number of other components and add-ons that are either assuming or require Linux functionality that people may want to use, like even Helm. I'm not sure if Helm can run on Windows nodes. So it's something that I think would be nice to have. I'm not sure I'm even ready to say this is a goal that we want to even set and kind of put a stake in the ground for like a plan for this yet, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it basically will trigger the whole port of a number of different components to Windows as well. But it will solve the use case for users that don't want to context switch between the operating systems in an isolated Windows workload cluster that, for instance, doesn't care about Prometheus or something else. Yeah.
Or, I mean, eventually people might want to run Prometheus on their Windows nodes too. So there's that other like direction too, is get everything running on Windows.
I'm wondering if we can run the Kubernetes control plane as Linux containers on Windows using Hyper-V isolation. I'm wondering.
That's something else that I was wondering. One of the things that I'm wondering about that is that I know a lot of the at least some of the components. I'm guessing like core DNS needs a lot of does a lot of interaction with the hosts too, and I wonder if Linux containers on Windows would be able to support kind of any of the privileged or kind of out of container functionality too. But that is definitely an interesting direction to consider and maybe pursue.
Yeah, maybe core DNS is actually the biggest blocker here because, to my understanding, the Kube API server scheduler and control manager should pretty much work already. I don't see any blockers for them, at least.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. They mostly just talk to other components in the API server.
Okay.
Yeah, we already know that core DNS works on Windows. We have it included into diagnosed image as well and use it in tests as well.
Okay, so maybe this isn't as far off as it seems.
Yeah, maybe it's just a matter of somebody tried it. I think, but yeah, I think the components should be good. The kubelet was the biggest push over the years. It was the most difficult component to get to work, but the rest seems pretty doable.
I guess if there's somebody, yourself included, who's interested in trying this out and reporting back, that would be a great way to kind of just see where we are, and if we are if most of the components are kind of just running on Windows.
Yeah, actually, I actually wanted to try this last year, but I ran out of time. Maybe at some point I can try it with a kubeadm setup to see if what changes are required. Yeah, I can give this a shot eventually.
Great, yeah, and if there's anybody else who's interested, feel free to reach out to us or Lumir to see if this can work for them too.
Thanks.
All right, is there anything else? If not, I'm going to stop this recording and hand it over to Jay for some of the kind of breakouts.
Sorry, Mark, I was late to the meeting. I could next time around talk about the short names and the 15 characters long. I was part of the discussion, but I was late to this meeting today, so I didn't have the opportunity to jump on it. I can talk about it a little bit next week.
Okay, and Nadir joined, and he had some comments about getting the support in Cluster API, and he was going to update this issue 2217 with some more details that he had that were kind of relevant here. So
Sounds
I
good.
think you're already on the issue, so you should get this.
Yes, I am. I am.
Yep, yeah, thanks, and we can discuss that again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to stop recording and hand it over to Jay then. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, cool.